Hello and welcome to the Elephant TV. My name is Abdullahi. Today we have an Ale, a writer from Marsalet Osman, a PhD student at NYU on Media Studies. And really today I would want us, to discuss about media and framing on Northern Kenya, largely the mainstream media. I'll start with either of you. The way the Northern media is viewed broadly by the rest of Kenya, it has got a lot to do with the way the media frames that part of the country. What does the mainstream media get wrong about Northern Kenya? Either of you.
I argued in the piece that I wrote here about how Kenyan media covers Northern Kenya. It's similar to how to how Western media covers Africa. And one of the main issues is number one issue that comes to mind is sending news reporters who are based in Nairobi, who don't have any connection, culturally or language to the region. And we see most of these reporters being sent in times of crisis. For example, when conflict is going on or a terror event occurs. So I think the number one answer to that is the Kenyan media gets wrong because they only cover the region when conflict arises. And they do this by not using reporters on the ground, but sending people from the city or from the capital to go cover these issues. So whatever comes out of this reporting is conflict centric. The framing is, it just shows that, the entire region is engulfed by conflict and wrangles between communities. So I think that's the number one problem. And this also affects the framing because, the kind of news sources that are being used, most of the sources that are being quoted are probably government or administrators, people who view this region in a colonial way, because there's a lot of colonial legacies going on of how the government sort of treats the region. So those are the two or three main things that come to my mind. I'm sure Dale has more points.
Yeah, I think the parachuting that we criticize the Western media, I think is a huge one. And also considering the region is a news desert until bad things happen, then you've got to ask yourself, between the last major attacks and drought and famine, what were people doing? It's like it's not newsworthy, or at least it's not deemed as such by the mainstream media. Dale, are you still there?
As Osman has rightfully pointed out, it's really a problem of scale. Whatever we see elsewhere, the problems within media generally plays out here as well. I think the narrative itself is important to point out because one, the region is painted as occupied by lawless people, by the livelihood style of pastoralism is unviable, and this follows. I think it follows the official government policy that negates people's way of lives, and so we see that stories follow or project this negative narrative about the North really as a place of lawlessness, as a place where nothing good really happens. And if it does, it's on the extreme side of tourism and potential and of culture and tourism really. So the narrative keeps oscillating between these two extremes of Westland and a haven for opportunities. So they miss a lot. They really quite miss a lot, as Osman has pointed out. Fly by night in, reporters who have no grounding at all on the local context, getting things out of context. Problems happening in Mandera is pointed as problems of Marsabit. Those of Isiolo are pointed as those of Wajir. So this, messing up the unique context within which the problems in the North play out is part of the media problem really.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's very flat, right? It's either so bad or it's good for tourism. It's land of badlands, where people practice ancient tradition that has got no place in the 21st modern reality. But I think one of the things that I with all the caveats, what I've realized is that social media is playing a good job in generating counter narrative, in pointing out some of these problems. But also we've seen community radio stations which cover, where tires meet the ground, right? If it's no water in a small sub-county, they cover it. Have these two, the mushrooming of community radio station, at least in most of the counties, we have one, in others more than 2 or even 3. And then, a bit of an urban phenomenon of, younger people who feel, they are unburdened by their parents' need to be good people for them to be accepted as citizens. But these are young, vibrant, urban, outwardly, and cosmopolitan. They tend to push. Can you speak to this issue, notwithstanding the fact that it's very urban, notwithstanding the fact that there's a class element, notwithstanding that these social media platforms are owned not by large corporations that are not Kenyan.
I can speak to social media. Maybe Dale can help me with the radio. But for me, I see social media as a space where, looking at the advantages, it helps sort of create counter narratives, sort of pushing against these established narratives from the Kenyan media, which is also inspired. The Kenyan media relationship to Northern Kenya is hugely inspired by how the government deals with the region. So that means the kind of news sources that are being used, kind of stories that are being covered, are things that will end up just showing Northern Kenya as, a region, just facing a lot of conflict. But now social media comes in giving a space for young people to sort of push against these narratives and create their own narratives by, showing what's going on in the region. Another advantage is, holding the government to account, calling out the government and the media on certain issues. Also setting agenda for the media. We've seen a lot of, for instance, when the abductions takes place, we see young people coming online and sort of, highlighting these issues. But at the same time, we should understand, number one, that digital media is not accessed by everyone. We live in a country where, there are many people in the rural areas who might not have smartphones. Even if they do, they can't afford, buying data for internet access. Or even some places they don't have electricity. So these are real issues. So that means, in as much as it's giving a space for counter narratives, but it's only limited to certain urban areas, as you mentioned, of people who can be able to, afford to access Twitter and Facebook. The other disadvantage is, as you say, these are things that are owned by, Western corporations. And that means, the government can easily interfere and, take advantage and sort of maybe arrest some of these people who are calling on the government to change. In as much as social media gives people the power to fight off these established institutions. At the same time, the government has an element of fighting harder by coming and, using digital media to sort of get to know the people behind it and arrest them or punish them. So those are the main disadvantages and advantages that are coming to my mind.
Ale, do you want to speak about the community radio?
Yes. So we see two developments with the devolution coming into, with devolution in Kenya now and the development of media counter narratives in the north. We see a very interesting dynamics playing out. So in the past 10, 15 years, we've seen an explosion of local radio stations that have come up for profit. A few community-based radio stations are up now. And this also has created another platform for training local journalists who are also telling stories in a very nuanced, sustained, complex, dynamic way. So this bridges a certain gap, but the problem really isn't really at the local level. So we see the media narrative playing out at the national level. So it's a power dynamics thing. So locally, everyone knows the nuances really, but whatever is being painted wrongly is at the national level. So it's a national media that has a problem. But also with the advent of social media, local radio station, with the establishment of new journalists from the area, it's created a very vibrant space where national media is also using these local journalists to tell stories. So while playing as local radio hosts. They double up as also correspondents for the national media stations. Advent of social media also seen like an establishment or an emergence of some kind of an alternative, platform for telling stories. You see, if you go on YouTube today, I think some of the most interesting stories happening in northern Kenya is being covered by individuals with just a camera, a stand, a mic. They follow their own rules. They're their own bosses. And we see a very dynamic, new way of telling stories. So if I want anything on Mandela politics, for example, I'll just go to Hassan Cameroon or at the YouTube and this is really interesting in a larger cultural sense, because we see music played on these platforms, dramas and skits of various kinds emerging. So all these kind of feed up into the countering the negative coverage over the years. Because for a very long time, media coverages has really been unquestioned. We see a very fast way, where mistakes, blunders by the national media is being called out immediately. So this is new, because for a long time, the sustained assault from national media's negative coverage went uncontested. Now we see a dynamic where, the likes of Osman or Abdul or me or any other person has the ability to call out that negative coverage. And that's very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I was really interested in while both of you were speaking was how then, can this relationship, I mean, there's a question of, ownership, which has its own dynamics. And I'm speaking here about the national media. There is also the question of power imbalance between the region and the other part of the Kenya. How, has then some of the large-scale infrastructure projects, particularly roads and all these issues, how at one level are they being covered? Here we've been, the first part, we've been talking about how the media's representation follows the official government from colonial to now. But here again, this region is poised and has been poised for some time now to be the next frontier, sorry for using the word, in terms of large-scale infrastructure projects, the ports, if you will, the wind power, all these energy transition debates are taking place in that part of the world. On one hand, I was very interested, is there the disparity between how the mainstream media covers and how the local media covers? Because for a lot of the time when the mainstream media covers stuff like that, it is very triumphant. This is Kenya. But when it's farming, which is Turkana, it's for Turkana. But when it's oil, it's our oil. We all own it. And does the community radio looks at it that way, or how does this play in terms of its presentation and framing in the local versus the national media?
The policy, like FLAPSET and these major infrastructure developments all follow the same storyline of wanting to transform the North, change the North, exploit the opportunities that are in the North, even painting it as, the future of Kenya. If in the beginning, the media coverages and the policies kind of looked at the North as a place of, all wrongs, where all Kenyan problems come out of, where starvation and wars and famines and every negative thing happens. Now, this is the extreme opposite of that. So we see a dynamic where, the story is painted as, the story of the infrastructure is told as one that is bringing peace to the area, one that is helping the birth of new cultures or making cultures in the place visible. So national level still is stuck in that space. Local radio stations, I think, kind of miss the nuances of what this large infrastructure project means, but also because they are also instituted and led from the national level. Local radio stations are kind of in the dark about the progress of this. So we've seen journalists being flown directly to the sites of those infrastructural projects. Local radio stations are overlooked in the telling of these stories. So it's a national project, really. So local radio stations have very little stake in how they're telling and articulating the stories. So you see grievances of the effects of these projects being painted, being told through the local radio stations, social media pages, but this is not covered at the national level. So, yeah.
Yeah, Osman, slightly related to that is one phenomenon that I really, I'm always very, it's very remarkable to me to observe is when somebody from, not necessarily the media, but somebody from the other part of the country visits places that I know very well in the north, and they say, "Oh no, I'm doing this trek from Nanyuki all the way to Chalbi Desert and whatever," and I'm always impressed by how not just them, the mainstream media in this case, but also even an average Kenyan, how they are painted.
Mm-hmm.
They speak in very, it's in the language of conquering a new frontier. It's similar to the Americans where, I'm doing across the country and, people look at it as an achievement. And, some of the stuff that comes out is, oh no, they're really good people. And my immediate reaction is, what did you make of them before that? They are human beings that live there. Why did you automatically assume implicitly, that they are not good people, right? So, I mean, like, how do you respond to that? This place about being touristy, it's the next frontier. It is, a place that people need to be. There's a lot of, Maasai weddings being splashed all around, the traditional ceremonies of rendiles made into something huge. I'm always struck by that, that kind of framing, that kind of narrative building.
I mean, this is it's a product of the years and years manufacturing of this image that, the region is just a place where, maybe like just surrounded by conflict and people fighting and terror and all these sort of images that are created. I mean, if you look at historically speaking, from the moment the Kenya gained independence, which now started, the Shifter War, there was a coverage about that, and then the post-Shifter War ended, and then Al-Shabaab came in, and you have this systematic, creation of this image of, a region where, it's the people who live in this place are people who fight each other, people who are facing lots of conflict. So if you're able to visit there and,
come back alive.
Come back alive.
It's seen as an achievement, it's an adventure, and I'm like, no, there are people who live here and they have they have a life. So when that is reproduced, I'm always loath to respond to them, but I'm always finding myself, people being, turned almost commodified, but in a way that is stuck in a very old way.
Just to add, it's like when a white man maybe visited Rwanda.
Or even Kibera.
Yeah, or even Kibera. It's a big deal, yeah.
Yeah, like, these people have got a lot of problems, but they're smiling, and I was like, what do you expect? But it's if a white man does the same way in Kibera, the first reaction would be these people who are instrumentalizing people in the north and themselves. I wanted to wind down. I mean, like, we'll have this conversation again at another time. But I wanted to ask this last question about, there is the national part, but there is also the local dynamics at play. And how can the county governments be able to do, this sort of work of, generating, not necessarily as a response to the mainstream national media, but even traditionally, just how they can respond to culture question. I mean, Ale, you've spoken about, the mushrooming of festivals. I mean, not in the way they are done, which is very, 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 very above the surface level, but in a very real way. There is a real culture here. There's a lot of music that is produced from this part of the world. And the fact that it's linked to the Horn of Africa, the fact that it's linked to the Arab world, it's an incredible cultural melting pot. But, how can the counties enable, artists I mean, I go from time to time on the YouTube and I see, comedians from that part of the house, and my brain explodes. I mean, like the level of talent that is there. How can the county governments help in nurturing this in a very systemic, authentic way, but not reproducing the same trope about the region?
I think the cultural festivals are quite interesting to watch across the north. It's like an explosion of it since devolution came in, but also it continues to perpetuate the problem of inviting people to come and score some kind of notorious point. Come experience some exotic food, people, culture, songs. The way of life. So
it's the Garden of Eden. It's the Garden of Eden. Come to the Garden of Eden, untouched by modernity, spoiled by anything.
Yeah. It says, come take a break from, the city. Come take a break from the normal way of life to this exotic, exotic land of wonder and splendor and whatnot, right? So this I think is very negative because it continues to perpetuate the same circle of stories that are misreported and uncovered, because the beauty of the North is really never captured in its true essence. If it's not overplayed, then it's downplayed, it's underreported, it's rehashed, it's repackaged in funny other ways. But devolution and county governments offer like an immense potential. We've seen them support local YouTubers in places like Mandera. We've seen cultural, theater groups being trained. So I think offering trainings, offering a platform where stories can be told in deeper, nuanced ways. We've seen them also inviting national media to like come and cover, the development projects largely financed by the county governments. We want them to go beyond that so that it doesn't look like, we are developing a wasteland, but we are covering people's way of life entirely in its authentic form. So I think it's a learning curve for the counties, and I think as we go forward, they are really catching up with this way of having nuanced conversations. So offering platforms is like immense resources that is within the capacity, within the ambit of the county governments that they could use to promote music, food festivals. I mean, we've seen all versions of this, but if they don't stop exoticizing it, the problem will continue. So yeah, so I think social halls are being built all over the place. Infrastructure is being developed. We've seen, with the county coming in, the establishment of telecommunication infrastructure in various places because they lobby these companies to establish, new network centers of some kind. Yes. I mean, even now, like music production, for example, you'll have to go all the way to Nairobi for you to produce music. So that's a really big problem where county governments can come in and provide platforms where diverse artistic forms of expression can be undertaken. So I think those are my points there.
Yeah, I think Osman, would you want to speak about the question of representation of people from the North within the media, not just the way they cover it, but journalists, not used as token. We've all used to Jamila, somebody with Bui, somebody with Kapia. I think there is a space there to talk about that, as well as the political economy of ownership of news outfit at the national level.
Yeah, I mean, nationally speaking, every time you come up with this critique, this mainstream media, they'll tell you, oh, we have this and this and this type of, journalists who, we've hired, who's working for us. But most of the time, it's very rare to find someone from Northern Kenya who works as an editor or in a role that is more influential, a role that allows this journalist to sort of understand, a journalist who understands the region, and when a correspondent who's based in the region pitches a story, this editor should be able to understand, because there's a lot of contextual meaning someone needs to understand, to be able to sort of approve a pitch or even assign journalists to write some story. So this is one of the main areas that the national media need to improve. Number one, hire news editors who are from the region, who understand the region, someone who can focus on the region. Number two, hire more reporters from the area, as well as just pay them enough, because most of them are poorly paid. So which creates a lot of, you have a journalist who's working there, but at the same time he has to look for other jobs. He or she has to look for other jobs, because I mean, they can't sustain themselves just working for the Daily Nation or the Standard. But also I feel like the county government should do more. I feel like, offer grants to local journalists, in terms of encouraging them to write stories. I mean, counties can always, partner with this mainstream media, to sort of just lobby for a space where can be created for nice, authentic stories that reflect the daily lives of the people of the Northern Kenya, to be published by these mainstream news outlets. So there's more that the mainstream media can do, and there's even more that these devolved governments can do as a powerful unit that, that can be respected by mainstream media.
No, thank you so much to both of you. I think we'll leave it at that. I'm sure we'll come back to each other, because there is a conversation that I want us to have about, the kind of literature that is coming from the North. And it's really remarkable if you search around the number of books that are published by, young writers from the North. For now, we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure I'll come back to you. Thank you once again to both of you, Osman and Ale, and have a nice day.